This is the Zhurong rover, a Chinese robot now sitting on Mars. It has discovered some very strange and new things about the planet. The big question remains, is there life on Mars? China might finally hold the answer to that ancient mystery. This is Zhurong, and for a rover, it's medium-sized. It is basically a copy of NASA's old Spirit and Opportunity design. Those American rovers landed on Mars back in 2004. Still, Zhurong is extremely impressive for a first landing attempt. It launched as part of the Tianwen-1 mission in the year 2020. At that time, China had experience with 2 moon landings. Jumping straight to the red planet was a very ambitious leap. Prior to this, only 3 space programs had succeeded on Mars. The Soviet Union was the very first, way back in 1971. Their Mars 3 lander successfully reached the frigid Martian surface. It deployed its instruments and sent back one single grainy picture. Then it shut down permanently, never to be heard from again. You might not know the British also landed on Mars in 2004. Their small probe was named Beagle 2, but it failed. Half of its solar panels got stuck during the deployment process. It was therefore never able to power on for science. And then, of course, there is the American Space Agency, NASA. They have been incredibly successful exploring Mars for decades. It started with the first Viking lander in 1976. It continues today with nuclear-powered SUV-sized rovers and even a helicopter. So when China threw its hat into the competitive ring, the odds were low. To maximize the chance of a safe and successful landing, they chose a site. The site was the flat plains of Utopia Planitia in the north. This region is believed to have once been a vast ocean. Meanwhile, NASA's Perseverance rover, also launched in 2020, went elsewhere. It touched down in the rugged Zhurong crater nearby. That crater is littered with steep hills and ancient river valleys. Just because China's site was safe and flat does not mean boring. There is a long-forgotten secret hiding in the Utopia sands. The Chinese may have come remarkably close to revealing it now. This is the same place where NASA's Viking 2 landed in 1976. It is also where many people believe America discovered life on Mars, but if they did, they might have immediately killed it by accident. This is not a story you will hear very often from NASA. According to the official record, no life has ever been found there, but unofficially, scientists found something really weird in the Martian soil. Since this was our first ever close experience with Mars, people in the 1970s were unsure, but most were extremely confident they would find alien life of some kind. So they devised a simple but clever biological experiment on Viking. Here is an extremely simplified explanation of how that experiment worked. They would scoop up some material from the dusty, rocky surface. Then they would pull that sample inside the protective lander. They then squirted the material with a little bit of special water. This water had some nutritious chemicals carefully mixed inside it. The idea was that any microbial life would drink the water. It would then consume the food and release CO2 as a natural byproduct. What the experiment found was that the hydrated soil did produce CO2 gas. So, aliens confirmed, right? That seemed like a logical conclusion at first. Well, part 2 of the experiment added more nutrient water later. The idea was that a thriving bacterial colony would produce even more gas, but that was not the case observed by the Viking lander. It turned out the more water they added, the less CO2 was produced. This confusing result led NASA to officially conclude there were no aliens. But that strange data has never stopped researchers from speculating over the years. If we are talking about bacteria surviving on an ultra-dry Mars, maybe it wasn't equipped for a sudden nutrient-rich water binge. Maybe what we actually did was accidentally drown the potential aliens. At least they died well fed, as the dark joke goes. Either way, this illustrates the potential for China to find something. Their rover could find something incredible even on flat plains. Zhurong achieved a successful touchdown using an old-school landing method. We have seen NASA get creative with high-tech landing systems recently. They used big inflatable airbags to land rovers. Then they upgraded to the complex sky crane system in recent decades. All of this is necessary for a soft landing with a heavy payload. But the Chinese rover is on the much lighter side of the scale. Therefore, they chose a more simplified and proven technical approach. A parachute slowed the lander down in the extremely thin Martian air. Once they got close enough to the rocky, dusty surface, the parachute was cut. A rocket engine then fired up to bring the vehicle down gently. The engine shut off just above the ground to avoid kicking up dust. Shock-absorbing legs handled the final impact of the touchdown. This is the same way the Viking landers touched down 50 years ago. It worked flawlessly for both of those historic NASA missions. The lander then extended a ramp down to the rusty surface. Zhurong unfolded its solar panels and drove itself straight into the history books. China became only the second space program to deploy a rover on Mars. The rover had a lot of science to do in a very short time. The mission was initially given a 90-day primary operational lifespan. Being solar-powered on a planet with prevalent dust storms is risky. You know that eventually the pervasive dust will win the battle. The Chinese rover has 3 main instruments to collect its valuable data. One is an array of different cameras to image the Martian surface. The second is a laser that can vaporize rock to see inside. And the third is a ground-penetrating radar system on the rover's belly. This is precisely how China started finding really interesting stuff on Mars. Deep below the windswept, sandy surface, Zhurong detected layers of minerals. These were hydrated minerals, meaning they had chemically bonded with water. Over a stretch of about 1 mile, the radar found 76 individual layers. These layers sat between 10 and 35 meters below the surface. And these discovered layers were not lying perfectly flat and horizontal. They all tipped at a distinct and measurable angle pointing toward the north. So what Zhurong was sitting on top of was an ancient coastline. This underground structure is very similar to coastal regions here on Earth. The layers would have been created by water flowing from the southern highlands. That water flowed down into the giant northern ocean billions of years ago. The depth and number of those layers suggest this process lasted long. It was ongoing for tens of millions of Martian years, not just briefly. This is not just more evidence that Mars once had liquid water. It is also a very strong indication the surface was very wet. It was also likely very geologically active for an extremely long time. Long enough, theoretically, for simple life to emerge and perhaps evolve. Well, that potential depends heavily on how old this water actually is. Because life, as we know it, needs water, but it also needs time. It needs a lot of stable time to develop and become complex. Previous scientific assumptions said water disappeared over 3 billion years ago. But what China found is now casting serious doubt on that old assumption. The deeper layers of hydrated material indicate a rapid flood event. This flood likely happened around 3 billion years ago, according to the data. So it is possible the first oceans of Mars did dry up. They may have been gone for a few million or 100 million years. But then the water somehow came back, and then it dried up again. But according to the radar, the water was not gone forever. The upper layers of material suggested another major flood on Mars. This one occurred much more recently, around 1.6 billion years ago. That is significantly more recent than anyone had really imagined before. So we are now basically cutting the desert era of Mars in half. This means that while microbial life thrived in Earth's oceans, Mars had water. It was providing a strikingly similar environment at the same time. But this entire story gets even weirder with Zhurong's other discovery. The rover continued to move slowly through the cold, arid desert. It began to study these long, low sand dunes on the flat surface. The dunes are about 30 meters long and just 1 meter high. So it was easy enough for the robot to climb to the top, and there it found something very unusual and unexpected on the dune. The dunes were covered in a very hard, crackly, and salty crust. This strange crust runs as deep as 8 centimeters down into the sand. Because of the planet's notorious and powerful global sandstorms, this is odd. A fragile crust like that could never form slowly over vast time. The constant wind would just blow it away before it solidified. So the most likely explanation had to involve liquid water recently. Liquid water must have soaked the very tops of these particular dunes. It then evaporated away, leaving behind this hardened, salty crust like cement. The current idea is that water vapor drifted from the North Polar ice caps. It then condensed high in the atmosphere and turned into fine snow. That snow fell on the ancient, salt-rich ocean floor of Utopia Planitia. That ancient ocean left behind a lot of dissolved salt in the soil. The salt combined with the snow and allowed it to melt into liquid. This liquid water then hydrated the outer layers of the dusty surface. Indications from the Chinese scientific studies are even more shocking. They suggest this wet event might have happened just 400,000 years ago. So at the same time early humans and Neanderthals roamed the Earth, there were snowstorms on Mars. So what is actually going on here with Mars and its water? The best we can tell, the polar regions of Mars are still active. These regions, where the largest ice deposits sit, go through warming and cooling. This process likely creates very long, slow climatic seasons on Mars. And at least one of those seasons probably includes regular snowfall. But these massive changes in seasons happen over incredibly long periods. We are talking hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Martian years. Now, what powerful force could possibly be driving that slow change? It is most likely the result of small variations in the orbit of Mars. It is also due to changes in the rotational tilt of the planet. Something remarkably similar happens here to our own planet Earth. We call this slow, cyclical process the Milankovitch cycles on Earth. They are governed by 3 major changes in Earth's movement through space. All of these changes affect how much radiation we receive from the Sun. One is called orbital eccentricity, which is a variation in shape. That is the slow transition between a near-circular orbit and an oval one. This specific fluctuation happens over a period of about 100,000 years. The second major factor is called axial tilt, or obliquity. The Earth spins on a slightly tilted angle that fluctuates slowly. It moves between 22 and 24 degrees over 40,000 years. Higher levels of tilt produce more extreme seasonal differences globally. Less tilt results in a smaller variation between summer and winter. The third factor is called axial precession, a slow wobble. This is a wobble the Earth makes on its axis of rotation. It is kind of like a spinning top slowly wobbling before it falls. This wobble happens over a period of around 26,000 years. It affects the precise timing of the seasons, like in early spring. We know a lot more about Earth's history than we do about Mars, so we cannot say for sure Mars goes through the same exact cycles, but there is also no compelling scientific reason to say that it does not. And if it does undergo these cycles, then there might be a perfect combination. A specific combination of orbit and rotation could warm the North Pole. This warming would cause the polar cap to release its water vapor. That vapor could then blanket the northern hemisphere in snow that melts. And maybe once every billion years or so, that cycle releases enough water, it could release enough to partially flood the entire planet again. Now, here is the truly wild and exciting part of the speculation. In all of that wet, slushy, mineral-rich soup on ancient Mars, an alien microbe may have evolved to survive. It could survive by slowly hydrating and dehydrating over millions of years. And perhaps we already found it with Viking, but then we killed it. We killed it because we did not understand its alien biology. We did not understand the extreme environment of Mars at the time. As for the Zhurong rover, it survived much longer than planned. It far outlasted its original 90-day primary mission on the surface. That extended time is how most of this information was finally revealed. It continued on for an impressive 358 total Martian days. In May of 2022, the rover went into a planned protective shutdown. It was trying to ride out a massive and planet-wide dust storm. The hope was it could power up again after the storm passed. This would work if the solar panels were not too badly covered. But we have not heard a single signal from Zhurong since that day. This is not the end for the Chinese space program on Mars, though. It is truly only the ambitious beginning of their exploration there. In 2028, Chinese robots will return to the surface of the Red Planet. But this time, they will come back to Earth with a precious cargo. They plan to return the first ever samples of Martian soil and rock. At that point, we will finally get a really good look at this stuff. And maybe, just maybe, we will find those elusive Martian aliens. And maybe, if we are very careful, we will not kill them this time. But we probably will kill them again by accident. History tends to repeat.